Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hunter, and today we're hosting Blue Mountain Politics. What I'm planning on going over today is sort of what Donald Trump's best case scenario would look like in the 2024 presidential election. Whether there be some sort of nominating issue with the Democrats, whether that be a health issue with President Biden, or just some sort of prolonged floor fight, whether that be that he's proven not guilty on any of his criminal charges, or things just continue to get worse for the Biden administration on economic and social issues, or on the war in Ukraine or the war in Israel. Let's have a look. To begin, we're just as always, we're going to start out on the West Coast. The traditional Democratic states, we're not really going to see a lot of movement in Hawaii, California, Oregon, or Washington. It is feasible that Oregon would move to like a 9 to 8 points, but to tell you the truth, I think it's going to be really hard. Even with weak a candidate as President Biden, I still think it's going to be pretty hard for President Trump, who is a rather controversial figure, to win this state. I think he's going to have a hard time with it. However, Alaska would almost certainly be solid red in this case. Let's move on to Montana. Montana is a pretty obvious choice. I mean, it's going to go solidly for Mr. Trump, as is Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. These states have always gone to Republicans. They'll very likely continue to go to Republicans unless something really serious changes. Let's look at Arizona. Arizona went to President Biden by a very slim margin last time. Let's assume that there's depressed turnout. We have a lack of suburbanites who are coming out and voting. Either they're voting for Republicans for economic interests, or they're just not voting for Biden, whether that be because, he hasn't delivered on economic performance, or that be because a lot of voters just don't have great memory, and a lot of times they don't remember why they didn't vote for the opposition. In that case, I could see Arizona swinging back to the Democrats. Not to the Democrats, to the Republicans. Biden won it by a tilt, so he won it by about 0.2 points. I could see in a best-case scenario Trump winning this maybe by about 5 points. I think it's entirely possible. I think he'll have a hard time with it, but I think it's entirely feasible that if Maricopa has a close enough election, or if there's enough of a Democratic turnout that's depressed, then it's entirely possible. Bear in mind, folks, this is going to be a video, of course it is best case scenario for President Trump, but one thing to bear in mind is that it's not necessarily that you're going to have a bunch of voters switch. It's more of just you're not going to have people come out and vote. So in Arizona, it would be things like, the universities in the state, as well as younger populations of new families and that sort of thing. They just choose not to vote. It's not necessarily people switching their votes, as, there are many will, the sort of suburbanite McCain Republicans, it's entirely possible that they change their votes this time around, at least a large number of them. But this is more of just, turnout is sort of lower than it would be. And that's sort of something similar we'll see in Nevada. I think Nevada, best case scenario for Trump, could be won by about 4 points. It's possible that the turnout is just depressed enough in Las Vegas and up in Reno that the suburbs and, the suburbs of both of these pretty major cities, as well as the rural areas, just end up ruling out. Could be a pretty similar situation to what we saw between, forgive me, I don't remember the current governor of Nevada, but Steve Sisolak versus his Republican challenger. I cannot remember his name, Joe something, but it was really just a depression of turnout, and you did have some voters who ended up switching their votes just because of immigration. Immigration is going to be a huge issue all down through here in the Southwest, and that's going to be an issue that Republicans could win on pretty easily, and that's why Nevada and Arizona are so much in play this election season. Look at Colorado. Biden's probably still going to win here by about 8 points, regardless of what we see. I think that just with Denver and Boulder and sort of this northern area, you're just going to continue to see it. Even if it's not terribly high, they're still going to sort of outweigh the western parts and the eastern parts of the state, as well as Colorado Springs, just in sheer volume of voters, even if that turnout's low. I think at minimum 6 points. I think probably we're looking at about 8. Actually, no, I would say maybe about 6 points in a best case scenario for President Trump. An exact same thing for New Mexico. These sort of states, they tend to go together. New Mexico is a little bit more liberal. I would say it's possible that with Albuquerque and Santa Fe, you might see in a best case scenario for Trump, this state going to Biden by, 7 points, maybe-ish. So that's what I'm going to stick with for now. The Dakotas obviously are going to go Republican. Nebraska's 3rd district, which I just accidentally clicked on, as well as Nebraska's 1st district and Nebraska at large, all going Republican. Nebraska's 2nd is going to be pretty close this time around. I think Biden won it by about 7 points. I'm going to give it a tilt, or even we'll give it a lean to the Republicans for now, and we'll just sort of stick with that. I think it's pretty unlikely that Biden could win this in a best case scenario, but I think it'll be pretty close here or there. I would consider a tilt, but I think I'm going to stick with that nice little pink color right there. Kansas and Oklahoma, of course, that's very easy. And I hate to say it, but Texas is probably going to be pretty similar in a best case scenario. So bear in mind, folks, that this dark crimson red is a 10-point win. This color is sort of a 5 to 10 point win. This color is a 1 to 5, and then this color is under 1%. So best case scenario for Trump, he could absolutely win Texas by 5 points, no problem. Best case scenario for Trump in Minnesota, I think he doesn't win Minnesota, but I think he gets it to within about 2 points. I think that he's more than capable of that if he really depresses turnout, especially with Arab Americans in Minneapolis, as well as more progressive voters in the universities. I think that that's entirely feasible, especially given the war in Gaza. I think it's entirely possible that we see this. And Iowa, entirely possible. It's a lot like Texas. That I realize I'm saying entirely possible a lot, but it's a lot like Texas in the sense that, a 10-point win for Trump, best case scenario, is entirely feasible. He really has a good shot in a state like this that's mostly focused on agriculture, and then there's a lot of sort of the Union holdover in that Rust Belt area. You'll see throughout this video, Trump's going to clean up pretty well here in the Rust Belt as we get along. Missouri, of course, it's going to be kind of a bloodbath for Biden here. Missouri is very obviously going to continue to go with the Republicans unless something seriously changes, well, like Montana, in the sense that until Democrats start really appealing towards those, the blue-collar working-class voter again, the specifically white blue-collar, once the Democratic Party switches back towards that, I think it's entirely possible that you see that. You can make the argument of Democrats and unions. And that is true that, the union bounce back in the Midwest is starting to see, some Democratic upturn. But I think, as long as you have a culture warrior like Trump, you're going to have a pretty difficult time with that. And of course, Bible Belt and Deep South is just going to stay for the Republicans. I see that Georgia is solid. I'm not going to put it quite there yet. Georgia, I think it's possible that Georgia maybe gets down to about 4 points. I think African-American turnout will be high enough in this state that it'll stay relatively competitive. But I think since last time, I really don't see, even in a not, perfect scenario for both Trump and Biden, which my next video will sort of be, what does it look like when neither of them get a best case scenario? What does it look like when it's just, sort of my prediction right now? And I'll sort of do a monthly prediction video about that with some other content thrown in. So with that in fact, I'll go over Georgia more extensively in that prediction video. But for now, Georgia, I'm going to say probably about 4 points. Florida, pretty easy 8 to 9 point win, Trump best case scenario. You have a depression of turnout by enough voters, as well as you have so many new voters who are conservatives from other states, and so many more liberal voters leaving. That's going to play a bigger role than people, I think, realizes. The exodus of Americans from different states, I think, will play a pretty big role going forward in what our elections look like. Pretty similar with North Carolina. Pretty similar story to Florida, which is just that if you have that depression of African-American turnout in university voters, depression of African-American turnout can come from a variety of factors. It can come primarily from economics. It can come from, sort of that feeling that Biden has not delivered on major issues. The university turnout will in large part be either a lack of, sort of the follow-through of progressive promises, and I hate to say it, but the war in Gaza is going to be Gaza and Israel is going to be a really serious it's going to be a pretty serious downturn here for university students. So it's very unlikely that, unless a ceasefire happens, it's very unlikely that a majority of America's college students are willing to vote in the presidential election. Not necessarily they'll vote for Trump, but it's just it's even if you have a depression of even 10 to 20,000 students, or more liberal voters, that can swing an election in a state like North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and some of these other states that we'll see later on. Of course, a state like Indiana, very obviously going to stick Republican. Same with Ohio. I would be inclined to say Ohio is probably going to stay about the same, but at the end of the day, I think it's probably going to be like Iowa, which is if you see enough of a depression of turnout, I'm going to keep hammering home that point, depression of turnout, you're going to see a Republican win here, in a big one. I would say Illinois, regardless, is going to stay pretty solidly blue. It's a lot like California in the sense that as long as Chicago is in the picture, you're not going to see, maybe it gets down to 9 points, but I think that that's highly unlikely. I think it'll probably be about a 12 to 13 point Biden victory, but Biden's going to win it nonetheless. In a state like Wisconsin, it is very, very, very possible that Mr. Trump could pull out, one of these wins where he wins by about 6 points. I don't think he's going to. I think he's probably going to win by about 3 in the best case scenario. That's just my prediction. I think that if you see, once again, I'm going to keep saying it, if you see University of Wisconsin-Madison, if you see that county down there in Madison just not turn out any voters, and if you see Milwaukee with a lower turnout, but then you see all of the suburban areas and all of this sort of white rural working class area of Wisconsin, you're going to see a loss here. Very similar to Michigan, which is that unless Biden can really rally the union workers, he's going to have a hard time. The wage issue is really a serious problem right now, which is that even though inflation is under control, people aren't feeling it because the prices are still so high. So it's very likely to depress this sort of working class turnout. And Michigan also has a huge Arab American population. And you can read just about anywhere. Whether or not you want to believe it is up to you. I'll go over it in my more accurate prediction video of like what I actually think will happen, not best case scenario for either candidate. I would just look into, if I were you reading about, watching this video, read about the Arab American turnout in Michigan, because it's making pretty close to 9% of their state population at this point. And they're pretty frustrated with Biden right now over the Israeli strategy. Whether you agree with that or not is neither here nor there, but that's just what I'm pointing out. With a state like Virginia, I think it's entirely possible that Biden probably is going to win here. Probably by about 4 or 5 points. I think that Virginia, at the end of the day, is probably going to stay in the Democratic column. I don't think you're going to see any major shift in that. And I think it's probably going to stay there. It could be won by a lot more. And I think Trump, could try to shrink the margin. But at the end of the day, he's not Glenn Youngkin. He's not going to be able to win over the suburbanites up in Nova, Northern Virginia. He's not going to be able to win those folks over down in Norfolk and Virginia Beach and Newport News. He will do well enough in the suburbs to keep it competitive, but he's not going to win them. He'll do well enough out in the rural areas, but at the end of the day, Virginia is a very urbanized state. I think you're going to have a hard time winning. Going up in the Northeast, of course, solidly blue. There's very little Trump can do, not New Hampshire. There's very little President Trump can do to swing these states from President Biden. He's not going to be able to accomplish it, regardless of how well he's doing. Most of these states, there's a hint of a chance that maybe, and the absolute, something really ridiculous would have to happen for, New Jersey to be within like 9-ish points. I think that that's insanely unlikely, but, you could make an argument that's the case. I think Pennsylvania, everyone's going to talk about these 3 states. And to tell you the truth, guys, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but these 3 states are so crucial to the election, as is Arizona and Georgia. You're going to see so much coverage over those 5 states over the next few months. And I think that, to tell you the truth, these 3 are going to play a pretty big role here, which is that, Biden's going to have to work his ass off in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin to make sure that he can keep these union voters on his side and to turn out minority populations as well as suburban, upper class, whether it be white collar or sort of the better, like unionized manufacturing voters, he's going to have a hard time turning them out. So it's going to be sort of a different strategy for him going forward. Also, I should apologize. I do these unscripted, so I've got some statistics in front of me, but for the most part, these videos are completely unscripted. So if you ever hear me sort of stumble over something, I do apologize. Feel free to correct me. This is just, want to make sure that I do everything properly. So just thought I'd let you guys know that they are not scripted. So if I'm ever, misconstruing my statistics or, referencing the wrong demographic group, then just know that ahead of time, and I'll probably drop a pinned comment below the video just to clarify any of my positions. All right, looking at Maine at large, you're probably still going to see, Biden's probably going to win this by 4 or 5 points regardless. And, that Maine's first district, he's probably going to win it by about 9 to 10. We'll say 9 just to give it Trump's favor. But it is possible that Trump just completely bashes him in the 2nd congressional district. I don't think it's, as I said, this is the best case scenario. I don't necessarily know if that's likely, but I think, he could pull it off. All right. New Hampshire is sort of a weird one where, if you've watched the New Hampshire primary recently, it was a really interesting race. And I might do a breakdown on that depending on popular demand. But I think that it's probably not going to flip to Trump. I think it could be pretty similar to 2016, where I think it's probably going to be pretty close, maybe 1 to 2 points, but Trump's not going to win that state. At the end of the day, I think it's going to be pretty hard for him to do that. So here we go, guys. I mean, it looks a lot like 2016, to tell you the truth. Trump's not a very popular guy. I think that the closest he'll get to the majority of America's voters is he could cap at around 48, maybe 47% of all national voters. But as long as he's hitting, these key states, this key 67 electoral votes of just lean states, he has a good shot. Places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada. He focuses on those, he's going to have a really good shot. Arizona at this point, I think, is his to lose. It's going to be close, but I'll go over that in my next video, that I think Arizona is probably going to be pretty locked up at this point for Trump. But we'll see what happens. Things are going to change, and I'll make sure to make predictions right up to the election. So we'll keep talking about this. My next video will definitely go over sort of what I think is the most realistic outcome right now at this point. It's like mid-January, so we'll go over that. And then eventually, we'll move to Senate and then House and Governor, and I'll throw in some other stuff. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.